Okay, you guys, if you want to find a seat, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's good to see you all this morning. So, it was in August 2005 that Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast. If you remember, offshore in the Gulf, it was actually a Category 5 for a while, but at landfall, it was a Category 3, winds up to 135 miles an hour. The storm itself only lasted like 7-8 hours, but that wasn't the worst part of it. In fact, the city of New Orleans at the time thought they had dodged a bullet. They were told Katrina would pass to the east, and the city kind of exhaled that Sunday night, thinking Monday's storm wouldn't be so bad. I mean, they knew wind and rain would be damaging, but maybe not devastating. And then the storm happened, and the largest storm surge in recorded history in the U.S. swept in like a tsunami. And the levees designed to hold back the lakes and rivers that kind of defined New Orleans as this Mississippi River town gave way in more than 50 places, and a 30-foot storm surge flooded into the city. Remember, the lower 9th Ward took the first punch. A wall of water, it said, moving faster than any person could run, lifted entire houses off their foundations and sent them bumping down the streets into one another. Cars floated and bobbed like ice cubes in a cold drink. People climbed trees and huddled on rooftops, clinging to anything that was still above the rising water. And within just a few hours, 80% of the city of New Orleans was underwater, often 20, 25 feet deep. And the city turned into kind of this archipelago of rooftops. And of course, as long as humans have gathered in cities like this, they face periodic calamity from things like earthquakes, floods, fires, pandemics, tsunamis, extreme weather. And there's a sense in which calamity has two faces. There's love and community, and then there's selfishness and cruelty. Calamity brings out sort of the best and the worst in people, sort of exposing, you could say, human character, fundamental virtues and vices hidden beneath the surface in ordinary times, find full expression when disaster strikes. It was Einstein who said, "Adversity introduces a man to himself." That's a good line. Catastrophe is revelation. And in its wake, two kinds of people spring into action. Two kinds of communities tend to form with very different priorities. One driven by compassion and solidarity, another driven by fear and scarcity and prejudice. Extreme circumstances kind of push us to extremes. Elie Wiesel, the author, he said that the calamity of Auschwitz taught him that there are no boundaries to human cruelty, but also no boundaries to human kindness. He learned that all in that horrible place. From places like Kansas, we imagine hurricane evacuations almost like a moral test, if not an intelligence test, like did you stay or did you go as a measure of common sense? But Katrina really exposed that as a lie. Tens of thousands of people left behind simply had no way to leave. Grandmothers in wheelchairs with no family or support. People on dialysis. The elderly, sick and frail. Family and friends who stayed behind to help them. Single moms managing 3 kids in a 4th floor walk-up. People without credit cards, without cash, without family in Baton Rouge or Houston. Thousands of tourists, remember this, were stranded when their flights were canceled and there were no more rental cars. Doctors and nurses who stayed behind to man their posts. And stubborn residents who, were hell-bent on protecting their property, Plus many who believed the city when it promised that the levees would hold. A mandatory evacuation order was actually issued pretty late, and few resources were provided to carry it out. So when the last buses were filled and flights had taken off, this sort of hidden social fault line that ran through the city was exposed. And a lot of blame was heaped on those who didn't evacuate, but the truth is that most of them had no way out. They just didn't have the means. And so they were left to face this calamity on their own. And calamity has two faces. The first face we might call open hearts, neighboring, strangers finding community, cooperation, and self-sacrifice. I mean, you could fill a book with the courageous acts of neighboring and just brotherly, sisterly love that happened in those few weeks. Families, breaking through their own roofs, then swimming over to haul up neighbors that they barely knew. A young man, I read about a guy named Jabbar Gibson, who stole a school bus and drove 70 people to Houston. He wasn't trying to be a hero, just got tired of staring at these single moms holding crying babies. And he decided, I'm gonna steal this bus and drive these people to high ground. And he did, saved 70 lives. People made rafts out of anything that would float. There's that one guy who used an empty refrigerator, remember, to ferry this elderly couple through chest-deep water. At the Superdome, kind of the Noah's Ark of desperation, people rationed water. They gathered to sing songs, to calm children. Strangers shared inhalers and blood pressure medicine, trying to anticipate whose body was in trouble. Pharmacists showed up, setting up tables to give out medicine. Pastors showed up to pray with the scared and the dying. Teenage girls organized to babysit young children so their moms could get some sleep. One man who was stuck on this overpass for days, finally somebody dropped some water, and he passed around a single bottle of water to 12 people before taking a sip himself. And when the reporter who brought it in asked him why, he just shrugged and said, well, it wasn't just my thirst. Calamity can inspire open hearts. Hearts breaking open toward the neighbor, toward the vulnerable. Acts of kindness like oxygen, offering breath to the drowning. And this deep sense of belonging to one another tends to emerge within calamity. But calamity has two faces. The second we might call closed hearts. Fear rising, imaginations turned dark and cruel. Rumors bloomed like bacteria in the southern heat in those days after the storm. Stories of babies being murdered in the Superdome, of marauding gangs of young men roaming the streets and killing white people. Reporters on the scene actually tried really hard to tamp down these fabrications, just passionately telling of the acts of courage and empathy they were seeing. But editors and producers and journalists who were far from New Orleans ran with these sensationalized stories of crime and snipers and looting and brutality. And truly, I read about this in a couple of reports. Fabricated rumors of just savagery and violence were reported on CNN as unverified reports. And then they were picked up and repeated by the mayor and the police chief, who had only heard them on CNN. But then CNN heard them repeating those and then cited that as confirmation that it was all happening. It was this little circular thing. One CNN report claimed, on the dark streets, rampaging gangs take full advantage of the unguarded city. Anyone venturing outside is in danger of being robbed or even shot. It is a state of siege. And actually, to this day, there is no evidence of rampaging gangs killing people. Reports of police being gunned down in the streets or snipers taking pot shots at rescue helicopters would all be retracted, though much after the fact. During the disaster, rumors that kind of confirmed deeply held prejudices. Those things don't need verification. They just need oxygen. And in the days following the storm, the lies spread as quickly as the waters. And it sort of hit New Orleans like a second storm. Those who were stranded, I mean, they weren't seeing the news reports. They didn't have electricity. But the mayor, the police chief, the sheriff did. And they seemed to pay more attention to Wolf Blitzer. Remember that dude? They pay more attention to him than their own deputies and sergeants and officers who tried to tell them a very different story is unfolding throughout the city. A story of strangers banding together, helping each other survive. We need to have their backs. And then the New York Times reported, chaos gripped New Orleans on Wednesday as looters ran wild. Looters brazenly ripped open gates and ransacked stores for food, clothing, television sets, computers, jewelry, and guns. Looting was a big word. And there was a lot of looting. But it wasn't just local minorities. I don't know if you remember the footage of this. Police officers were filmed raiding a Walmart electronics department. You remember that? They were still in uniform. The police actually, there's this famous story in New Orleans among the people that the police came and stripped a Cadillac dealership of its entire stock. They just drove away. Officers were filmed driving these things away and then filmed as far as Houston, still in the Cadillacs, many of them having just deserted their posts. This story was actually so widely known in New Orleans that when that dealership reopened, they rented a billboard and bragged that their cars were driven by New Orleans' finest. It's pretty funny. And they all knew the joke. In a disaster, it's interesting, looting is actually more like the requisitioning of life-saving supplies. I mean, their homes are gone. No grocery stores were open, no pharmacies, there's no electricity, no drinking water or sanitation or basic services. They needed food, they needed water, baby formula, medicine, clothing, blankets. And there was terrible looting happening, but a lot of the gangs of looters, like for instance at the Superdome where you heard about it a lot, they were in fact young black men, teenagers, who were super concerned about the elderly, like their grandparents. They got fixated on this. And so they organized shopping carts and took turns making trips to local stores, collecting food and juice and water and medicine, and then hauling it back to the Superdome, and then organizing to dispense it in an orderly way among all the refugees, giving priority to the elderly and to single moms and the most vulnerable. This is young men. Extensive investigations after the fact revealed that really the only deadly gangs roaming around with guns were white vigilantes, claimed to be protecting property and stopping looters. Right across the river in Algiers Point neighborhood, it's a very affluent neighborhood, men formed informal patrols with shotguns and handguns and assault rifles. They set up roadblocks at the bridge, firing warning shots at unarmed evacuees trying to walk out of the city. A 30-year-old man, Donnell Harrington, had taken charge of his teenage cousin and one of his friends. They were evacuating on foot, trying to cross the bridge, approaching the ferry landing and at Algiers Point when white vigilantes opened fire on them. Harrington was shot in the throat and shoulder. He ended up surviving, but because some stranger pulled him and hid him under a tarp until he could get out. In her book about this, Rebecca Solnit confirmed in this one neighborhood, they knew of 7 people who had been shot by these guys from the neighborhood. Another report, I think it was ProPublica, put the number at 11. At the Danziger Bridge, New Orleans police responded to an unfounded report of an officer shooting, and they opened fire on 2 separate groups of unarmed citizens. One was the Bartholomew family, Susan and Leonard, who were 38 and 44 years old, with their teenage children and a nephew and one of his friends. Were crossing the bridge trying to get to a grocery store, to food and supplies, when police just opened fire without any warning. Susan lost her right arm. Her husband was shot in the back, head, and foot. Her daughter, Leisha, and a nephew were seriously wounded. Both of them survived, but that family friend, a 17-year-old named James Brissett, was killed. None of them had weapons. On the other side, brothers Lance and Ronald Madison, also unarmed, were shot at by the police, and when they ran off, they pursued them, and Ronald, who was a 40-year-old man with severe mental disabilities, was shot in the back. Witnesses said, with both hands in the air. His surviving brother was then arrested, and for weeks they tried to frame him for all the shootings. Eventually, it was 10 officers were convicted of civil rights violations and jailed for the incident and for the cover-up. Calamity has two faces. Both of them were revealed in this New Orleans hurricane. As the water slowly receded, one face you could find rowing around in a leaky canoe down flooded streets, helping families climb into the boat and getting them to safety. The other face, just blocks away, perched with a rifle, firing warning shots at evacuees who tried to come down their block. The calamity of Katrina, as we know, it cracked New Orleans wide open. And these two faces appeared, revealing, in a sense, a really beautiful and terrible reality. That calamity can pry open your heart or shut it tight like a vault. Calamity has two faces, the face of courage and generosity, but also fear and selfishness. The face of neighborliness, stirred by compassion to acts of self-giving love, but also of tribal panic, stirred by fear and acts of brutality and evil. In the weeks that followed, national reporters lamented the failure of leadership and the breakdown of emergency management, and all of it kind of just a polite way of saying the city's poorest residents, mostly black, were abandoned by systems meant to protect them. Systems that had been eroded by years and decades of underfunded or funding cuts. They've been treated like enemies by their own leaders who never seemed to see the tender community that was unfolding right under their noses. Yet Katrina revealed something else, something kind of hard to measure in statistics. That stubborn human impulse to create pockets of mercy when the world just collapses. Doctors operated in hallways by flashlight. Strangers sharing the last sandwich. Musicians playing, it's such a big music town. Musicians would climb to the roofs and just play on the rooftops because music matters for weary souls. There's a story of one man who spent hours trying to flag down a helicopter for this pregnant stranger that he had only just met. Churches opened their doors. Chefs engineered little makeshift street kitchens, cooking meals for thousands. People would just bring up whatever they had, they'd cook it up. An armada of flat-bottom boats flooded into the city, rescuing thousands. There's a famous interview, this one woman who had lost everything told a reporter, "We ain't got much left, but what we got, we're sharing." And in every life, there are moments when the future we were planning seems to almost just evaporate. Some dreadful challenge blindsides us. Calamity sort of puts us at a crossroads. And the path that we choose will determine what kind of future we call into being. In her book, A Paradise Built in Hell, Rebecca Solnit talks about this. She says, you have to remember, inside the word emergency is the word emerge. From an emergency, new things come forth. The old certainties are crumbling fast, but then she says, danger and possibility are sisters. That's a great line. Calamity opens up new possibilities that are not normally on the table. Danger and possibility are sisters. They track together. And the choice we make between them will in many ways determine the kind of future we call into being. In the midst of the book of Isaiah, there are these two chapters, 34 and 35. And they're kind of out of place from the rest of the book. They're written in verse like poems. It's like this little interlude in the middle of the book. Chapter 34 begins with this scathing judgment. Draw near, O nations, to hear. O peoples, give heed. Let the earth hear, for the Lord is enraged against all the nations and furious against all their hordes, and he has doomed them and given them over for slaughter. And then he mentions this one people, Edom. When my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens, lo, it will descend upon Edom, upon the people I have doomed to judgment. The Lord has a sword. It is sated with blood. It is gorged with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah, a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Their land shall be soaked with blood, for the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of vindication by Zion's cause, and the streams of Edom shall be turned to pitch, and her soil to sulfur, and her land shall become burning pitch, and smoke shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie in waste, and no one shall pass through it forever and ever. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God, right? So who are these Edomites Isaiah is so angry with? Well, Edom is often mentioned in Scripture because they were often at odds with Israel. The Hebrew word Edom actually just means red. You may remember it from the story of Jacob and Esau. Remember the twins? Born Esau first, Jacob came out grabbing his heels, so he was called Heels. But Esau was born with this bright pink complexion and thick red hair, so they named him Red, Edom in Hebrew. His descendants were the Edomites. They were conquered by King Saul, but not fully subdued, and David finished the job, and Edom became a vassal state under Israel until this massive calamity occurred when Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. And the Edomites, brothers of the Israelites, fought with Nebuchadnezzar. It was a big reason Israel was destroyed and taken into exile. So Israel despised Edom for betraying them and joining with Nebuchadnezzar in their destruction. And Isaiah is giving voice here to their desire for revenge. Walter Brueggemann, about this passage, he says that yearning and resentment give rise together to extravagant rhetoric, he says, that may run beyond reasoned faith. Like, yeah, we just read it. That's a little off the chain. This sort of rhetoric, he says, unleashed in therapy, when the floodgates of resentment, too long closed, are finally opened on the raging silence and everything is grossly overstated. So the Israelites distorted the facts to suit their hurt feelings. In chapter 34, they rant and rave, calling for Yahweh to just burn Edom to the ground. It's a gross overreaction. Especially when you consider like what Edom had done is sort of business as usual in the ancient world. It wasn't anything Israel hadn't done at one time or another. But calamity has two faces. Isaiah seems to be doing this, by the way, on purpose. He's kind of giving them a chance to vent. It's a little therapy session in 34 where they rage and fume. So they can kind of come around to that second face in Isaiah 35, where it says, the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly. Crocus is a flower that it's the first flower of spring. It comes up when it's still snowy and frozen. And rejoice with joy and singing. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the majesty of our God. Strengthen weak hands and make firm feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong and do not fear. Here is your God. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. It shall be for God's people, and no traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. But the redeemed shall walk there, and the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And it's an odd thing to say, Israel had been essentially annihilated and left for dead at this point. I mean, they were very much like the people in New Orleans who were just left behind to fend for themselves. Then along comes Isaiah with this glowing report of an incredible future. It's this poetic word of comfort for a people who had lost everything, people with weak hands and feeble knees, fearful hearts, blind eyes and deaf ears, with broken bodies and speechless tongues. And it's kind of strange. It's out of place. Isaiah's talking to people who have nothing left, driven to despair by the calamity of war. And the prophet kind of puts before them two futures from which to choose. They can activate their worst impulses, choose revenge, and lay waste to the Edomites, or they can let calamity pry open their hearts, drop their prejudices, hold to love and compassion, and birth, in a sense, a kind of hope from that traumatic loss. And what the prophet says is that only this second path really is worthy of the people of God. We often say that prophets were the bearers of bad news. They point out all the problems. They're always a little bit annoying and out of step with the tribe, going against the grain, always saying things nobody wants to hear. It's usually bad news about injustice or idolatry or corruption. But sometimes going against the grain means speaking a word of hope in the midst of calamity, against the drumbeat for war and revenge. And when everybody else has lost all hope and just wants to lash out and burn it all down, the prophet knows calamity has two faces. And we all have a choice. They can say vengeance isn't the only way. There's another path. And if we choose it, the Lord will help us, will raise us up. We actually do have reason to hope. I think for all of us in preparation of Advent this year, I think observing Advent in a time like ours involves learning to do what Isaiah is talking about. I mean, our own world is a very troubled place. Times are unstable. Our situation is precarious. I was thinking about it. We've kind of been dealing with catastrophes, like pretty big ones, for 25 years. The 9/11 attacks, 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the 2008 financial collapse, a global pandemic, the racial strife and Black Lives Matter protests, the January 6th insurrection, the rise of authoritarianism and Christian nationalism, the erosion of democratic norms at home, wars in Ukraine and Gaza, deep cultural divisions that just kind of pervade our current situation. I mean, it's no wonder things feel a little bit fragile in our world. It's not any one thing either. It's just a bunch of things at the same time. And the first prophetic move is always to try and tell the truth about it. Resist the fantasy of blaming others and the desire for revenge. But maybe the most radical move the prophets make is what Isaiah does in chapter 35. After just torching Edom in 34. He pushes through the bad news and finds this place of hope. And I think that's the truly radical move, to speak words of hope, that God will appear. God is coming. God has not left us here alone. God will lift us up in due time and lead us toward peace. And honestly, I can't think of anything more important for us to be able to do as a church, as persons, living with so much heaviness in our lives and in our world, than to take this Advent season and try somehow to rekindle a sense of hope. And then to live from that place of hope. To be able to say to people, things will not always be this way. And God has not left us alone to suffer. God is with us and is taking us somewhere good. We're kind of in the end game of the Advent season this year, where our goal is now to try to pull away a little bit, to slow down, quiet ourselves, to find a little stillness and try to prepare our hearts to receive the hope of the world, to find a place of hope in our own hearts and kindle that flame so we can then hold hope high for the rest of the world. It's just mired in chaos and despair and needs a people of hope. And these are not easy times to be hopeful. There's a lot to worry about, much to lament. There's much to be alarmed about. Despair is pretty natural. But our task in this last phase of Advent is to reach out to God and each other, to reach deep inside ourselves and find a place of hope. A sometimes illogical, irrational, unreasonable hope, like the one Isaiah brought to the people of God. Because calamity has two faces. And we do have a choice which face we wear. In the ancient world, there was this trade route called the King's Highway, passed right through the land of Edom. In fact, on their flight from Edom, the children of Israel asked the people who lived there for permission to use the road, and they were rejected. It was kind of devastating for them. They just needed a way out of the mess they were in, but those people would not let Israel travel through. And Israelites could really hold a grudge, And in our world today, we need a way out too, a highway out of the mess we've made, out of the fear and vengeance and cynicism and despair of our own time. Isaiah promises a highway. He says, so clearly marked, even a fool can't get lost. A way out of the hopeless situation. In fact, this is deep in their story. It was centuries later, after Edom had turned on Israel and fought on Nebuchadnezzar's side in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar turned on Edom, of course, took away their sovereignty. And for centuries, the Edomites lived under the thumb of one empire after another, just like the Israelites. Israel, the sons of Jacob, Edom, the sons of Esau, both lived in ruin and despair. And then around 163 BC, a revolution arose. And Edom joined forces with Israel. And the ancient brothers reunited and fought together and won back some of their own sovereignty. Jerusalem was restored. The Israelites were reinvigorated. But Edom had just grown so weak that they were barely hanging on. And in the midst of this, the Israelites did something completely unexpected. They protected Edom. They supported them and strengthened them. And slowly over the course of generations, Edom basically just folded back into the life of the people of God. And it was actually kind of a big controversy at the time. Pharisees did not want them included, but they were included. In a sense, the sons of Jacob and Esau became one big family. Again, isn't that incredible? And from then on, Edom and the Edomites, it's not mentioned again in the annals of history. They're just part of the Jewish people. The prophecy of Isaiah, in a sense, actually did come true, just not how they thought. Edom did cease to exist, but not because they were restored or destroyed, because they were redeemed, restored, because they were brought back into the family of God. All because the Israelites just found the strength to let go of their need for vengeance. They began to live again from a place of of neighborly concern and hope. Because calamity has two faces. It can pry open our hearts or seal them shut like a vault. And living as we are in a time when fear is on the rise, when imaginations have gone dark, we are the people of God. We're the ones who are meant to find a place of hope and then to reach out with others. We're the ones who choose community and cooperation and sharing and self-sacrifice with open hearts, chasing a world of shalom, of peace. And so our task really for the rest of Advent, you guys, is to try and do whatever we got to do to find a place of hope in our hearts, a place of hope that we can extend to others. Calamity has two faces. Which face will we wear? Which face will the world see when they look at us? Let's pray. Oh God, we thank you for this season of Advent and time spent in the prophets, for the wisdom of Isaiah. Just get it all out, rant and rave. And then circle back and tell the truth about you, our God, who never stops coming after us, who hasn't left us alone. And we want so much to believe this, God. We want so much for you to be active in the world and to be able to see it. And we hear the words of Isaiah. It's up to us. We're the ones. We have to cultivate the hope, and then we'll see it. And so we ask you to bless these last few days of Advent for all of us, that we'd each find just some contemplative moments, some moments of silence, moments to open up and to long for and dream of a better world, a world where all can know you, where everyone has enough to flourish and find wholeness and peace. So stay with us in these last few days, we ask. Amen. If you would stand, please.